If anyone would like to come and join us for Congress Live, we're about to start our discussion on the caring economy, because when you're at a 4-day conference, what else would you want to do at lunchtime than talk some more? I'll call our guests up in just a second. And if people would like to come and join, there's some seats up the front, or you may be part of our global audience, which we're streaming to live on the Congress website. So I reckon for those that are here, we will get more people coming to sit with us if we make a bit of noise in introducing our guests onto stage for this discussion on unions in the caring economy. In no order of priority, but please welcome up to the stage Siobhan from the CLC Canada, Amira from the AFL-CIO, and Zingwisa, who is the president of CASATU, up on stage. Yay! That's great noise. Good on you guys. Look, the big disruption really of the second half of the 20th century has been the transformation of unpaid work that was traditionally done by women, first into paid work and now into professional careers. Nursing, teaching, aged care, childcare, disability. The caring economy is now a driver of employment and an emerging powerhouse of the global union movement. But it's a different model of work, where value is not just defined by physical outputs or time on the clock, but things that are harder to measure, like empathy and teamwork. So today's panel is an opportunity to explore some of the very different ways unions are organising these economies, and more importantly, how these industries are organising these economies. So it's going to be a fairly relaxed discussion. We're going to push on despite the echoing noise and all our delegates sort of catching up on the edges of the side. But to start off, could I just get each of you to explain to me a little bit how the caring economy works in your country, and also how you like to understand it and explain it to other people. So this is kind of your barbecue, as we call it in Australia, barbecue piece, how you would introduce the issue to a crowded room that is seeking some sense of the matter. So why don't we start with Siobhan, we'll go down the line and then go into some meatier topics.
Excellent. Yeah, no, thanks. I'm looking forward to this discussion. When we speak to the care economy, quite honestly, in Canada, it's a new framing of us putting all of this type of work in the same place. Because we obviously have a very proud history around healthcare, education, whether it's care for, people when they're young, childcare or elder care, all of that is extremely important. But talking about it as a whole economy is really us pushing the envelope there. So we have a lot of work to do around that. And in Canada, care work is provided as it is around the world, whether it's paid in a formal economy way, the unpaid work that has to happen, but also the informal work that is done. Now, it is primarily done by women, a lot of racialized women, and it is often undervalued. Now, we have strong public systems for part of the care work, but too much of it is provided in private ways where the jobs are not respected at the level we'd like to see. So our work really is around framing this care economy for people to see the importance of those who provide the care, and also the importance of people getting the care that they deserve. And so that is what we've been pushing for, and that's what we are glad to have these discussions at the international level, because care matters for everybody and those jobs deserve to be respected.
Before I hand to Amira, we've had a late addition to the panel. Jyoti from Siwa, come up.
Yay!
Amira.
Thank you. So in the United States, I think the caring economy does certainly look different than it does in Canada, specifically in the healthcare sector. So the caring economy in the U.S. encompasses many private enterprises, some public, that provide health, education, and social services. It's a really mixed bag. Unfortunately, in healthcare in particular, I'm from the nurses union in the United States. In healthcare in particular, we have this confusing, inefficient, ineffective, for-profit healthcare system that really devalues our healthcare workers, really devalues patient care and communities. Surely, like most countries across the world, our caring economy has both the formalized paid portion of the caring economy and then the informal care workers. Right now, some estimates think that the caring economy in the US is about $6 trillion, which is approaching a quarter of our GDP. But a large amount of that estimate is in the unpaid care labor portion of the economy, which could be between 2.5 and 3.5 trillion of that $6 trillion. So I think in the US we have two real challenges. The first is how we ensure that we are formalizing the unpaid, informal parts of the caring economy. But second, how we ensure that the formal, paid parts of the caring economy are valued, because we see a deep devaluation of care work in the United States, and that is because care work has been feminized for so long. Because it's been feminized, it has been devalued in really large ways, and so it's so important for unions in the United States right now that we are working to build strong union jobs in the caring economy as we work to move much of the informal caring economy into a formal sector.
Zingwisa, how do you explain the caring economy in the South African context?
Thank you very much. In the South African context, we have the care economy that consists of the healthcare, your social workers, the education, and also domestic work sectors. And our care economy in South Africa has three main characteristics in it. It's care services that are provided for by government in the public service and the private sector, but also our government uses the NGOs and NPOs to deliver this. And as my colleagues and comrades have alluded to, that it is an underpaid and unvalued, particularly in the informal economy. And there in South Africa, we have what we call community healthcare workers, who are also part of delivering that healthcare system. What they do is they get stipends from government in order for them to deliver those services. Stipends is not necessarily a salary, but it is what you get at the end of the month for the provisions of work that you are doing.
So I'm assuming no conditions to go with it.
You would then not have what an ordinary or employed in the formal economy worker would receive in terms of your pensionables and all of that. But as trade unions, because in South Africa we have fought for a national minimum wage, which now we have, we are also fighting at the level of NEDLEC. We have a system in South Africa that is NEDLEC, which is a tripartite system where government, trade unions, and big business, including civil society, negotiate on policy issues. And part of it is to advance the informal care that is done by the community care workers to be included in the national minimum wage, which would then give them the dignity in terms of ensuring that they get not below the national minimum in South Africa as we fight for a living wage.
Jeetwa, welcome to the stage. We're just starting off this conversation trying to understand how each different country understands the caring economy. How would you explain the degree to which there's a caring economy in India?
Sure, thank you. I think I would express more on behalf of the informal economy workers and especially the women workers, because we are a union of women workers in India. And the informal economy constitute 93% of the labor workforce. So I would just see on their behalf what do we mean by care economy for the informal economy workers. And of course, for these workers, child care and health care and elderly care is very important, because the informal economy workers, they also go for work outside to earn wages for 8 to 10 hours. But also they take care of their own children, the elder, the others in their own houses, which is not paid. But I think while we discuss with all the informal economy workers, the leaders of our union, And while we were discussing what we do mean by care economy, and as I expressed already, childcare, elderly care, and the other care, but some of our workers who also came with some of their definition on understanding the care economy, which I really would like to share, and that is, we have a lot of women who are the agriculture workers. They have small lands, and they put so much effort in terms of taking care of their own agricultural land, make the land fertile, and they put so much effort in doing that. So they were asking us whether are they also the care economy workers, because they also take care of the land. Similarly, we have waste recyclers who move on the roads to collect the waste and clean the city. So they are taking care of the environment. So they also had a question and a dialogue with us whether the waste recycler also contribute to the care economy. So when we see the informal economy, it's a vast definition on care economy.
It's such an interesting spectrum, isn't it? From informal economy to stipends to a privatised dystopia, which sometimes I think of the American healthcare system and then the Canadian model. How's the pandemic, do you think, changed the way caring work is seen when, you know, people like me got locked up in my roof? No one really cared, but we did need the workers on the front line in all those areas to be putting themselves out in harm's way. Do you think that's a bit of an inflection point in thinking about the value around work? I don't know, start with you, Amira.
Yeah, thanks. That's, I think, a really important question. And I personally, I think that the answer to that has shifted over the course of the pandemic in the United States. So in the first few months, we saw this outpouring of love and recognition and appreciation for our care workers and for our frontline workers, our essential workers. And it was amazing to see whole cities coming out at 7 p.m. to clap for the nurses and the doctors and the healthcare workers, and except that that did not necessarily translate into this sort of valuation of their work that we need and that we deserve. And despite that, despite the fact that it was so clear in the worst of the pandemic that our society needs, in order to function, needs our care workers, we have not in the United States been able to do much to actually change the conditions of their work. So right now, to speak directly to nursing, we are in a massive staffing crisis where despite the pandemic, despite the ongoing pandemic, nurses are being understaffed at hospitals across the country. We still don't have pandemic health and safety protections that we need. Rates of workplace violence in hospitals are skyrocketing. We don't have workplace violence protections that we need. Union busting at acute care hospitals across the country is severe. And nurses are leaving the bedside because they feel so undervalued and so unsafe, and they feel that they are putting themselves and their families at risk by working. And so we have more than 1.4 million actively licensed registered nurses who are not working, people who want to work, who love caring for their patients, but can no longer put up with the level to which they are disrespected and undervalued at the hospital bedside. So I do think there's a question here about how we harness the public support and appreciation that we saw for our care workers, the fact that so much of the public recognized how critical our caring workers are to the function of society in those worst months of the pandemic. How do we take that and in the United States, in this very difficult, messy, as you said, private, corporate, utopian system that we have, how do we translate that into real progress for our care work? That is the question.
Zingwisa, how did it play out in South Africa? Was it a similar reaction to almost turning care workers into saints until the caravan moved on?
Indeed, as I was listening to my comrade, I realized that it has been probably the same in the entire world, where when we had to deal with the pandemic and we were all on lockdown, healthcare workers had to be in the front line of fighting COVID. And the challenges that we had, as you said, were the PPEs that were not provided. Remember also in South Africa, in the apartheid era and transitioning into a democratic state, we had a healthcare system that was a two-part healthcare system. The one that was meant for the majority of South Africans that in majority are black, and which was deteriorating, which even today is still the case, overpopulated, and you have vacant posts that are not filled, and you have healthcare workers that are overburdened, who cannot cope, and who are not recognized when it comes to an example of wage. Currently, as we speak, there are issues of wage negotiations where the demand, when healthcare workers and education workers are calling for a living wage, a government would have all the issues to say, but we cannot afford. But those are the ones that are still called for to stand on the front line to defend the public due to COVID-19. But also, as she said, that we still have the difference of the private healthcare system and the public healthcare system. Hence, we have been advocating for a national health insurance, which is a universal healthcare system that is going to bridge the gap between those that have and those that have not. So with the population of South Africa that is also, because South Africa's population is sitting at about 51 million, but we also have people that are coming into the country who are migrating from within the region. And you then have the strains that healthcare workers have to deal with. You have, if you were to go to the maternity care, you have mothers that are expected to be delivering babies who are sleeping on the floor because the healthcare system is unable to deal with that. But at the center of it, it is the healthcare workers. But I also want to stress that the education system, because educators are also at the front line, they are also expected in schools to also be healthcare workers, to provide the service that healthcare workers are expected to provide, to bridge that gap. Because when we expect that we take our kids there, we need to ensure that they are safe. So you still have healthcare workers that needs to play the role that is played by healthcare workers, which they are educators. So you still have those abnormalities in South Africa in terms of the healthcare system, but we are saying that the pandemic has just unraveled what was there already. It had made it worse. The psychological
Pandemics
state,
find the weakness in any system,
the
right?
psychological state of healthcare workers is a cry for, because we are only looking at them to provide service, but we're not taking care of them.
Yeah. Jit, how was the experience of the pandemic for the women that you represent?
For you, yeah.
I think because in our union we had this approach of training our members themselves to become the health workers, and they themselves were trained to become the teachers to take care of the childcare centers in the villages. And so I think while in the pandemic, these health workers, because we had trained them community-wise and trade-wise to deal with the health issues, not only just because of the pandemic, but before that also. So then they were trained towards the pandemic on how do we take care on creating more awareness to our members in the communities, both in the villages and in the urban areas, on just going and creating awareness on how do you take care of the pandemic. So these health workers who were trained by our own union played a huge important role in the community to go to the community and train them beside the formal nurses or the hospitals were doing. But we had this benefit because we had our own trained health workers, and also the childcare, we run our childcare centers, and the teachers were there who were trained to the same. So we had this a big cadre of leaders, the workers who were moving in the communities and taking care of our members and the communities. So I think that approach really helped us to put them in the front while the pandemic happened.
Siobhan, in Canada, your movement is not just talking about the contribution, but also the opportunity of investing behind caring work. The CLC wrote to the Prime Minister in the wake of the crisis asking for the economic recovery to be anchored on investment in the caring economy. What's the logic behind that, and also what's the reaction been from Justin?
Yeah, so we are trying to take advantage of us having a feminist government and for them to be looking at this with that lens. And many of the lessons we learned during the pandemic, quite honestly, are similar to all of your experiences, which is care work was seen more, right? Like whether it was the humorous side of it of parents missing the teachers, missing school, missing all of that, and making memes about get these kids out of my house and that funny side, but it also exposed the hard side, which is all that care work that makes it so we can do all of work, whether that's childcare, it's parents who lost the support for their maybe special needs children because they were in front of a computer with a teacher but lost all of their other supports, those who no longer had access to addiction services. And so we saw this kind of awakening to all of this care work. And to put it in perspective, in Canada, it is 1 in 5 workers. It is a huge part of our economy. And so we thought those lessons. We also saw the banners saying thank you to care workers. We saw one of the best responses in terms of support for Canadians, in terms of funding during the emergency benefits. And we're all in this together. And so out of the pandemic, when we see that it is not resulting in collective agreements acknowledging the value of that work, it's not resulting in increased funding from our governments, where the majority of funding for care comes from, is in our public systems, whether it's, provided publicly or provided by a not-for-profit or private. And so we want to take this moment to not lose that remembrance of we cannot function without care work. And so the Show We Care campaign that we have, we're really prioritizing listening to people around their experience of providing care. We have similar stories because we have this nursing crisis, we have a staffing crisis in our systems in Canada, and so we want to hear from the people who do the work. We want to hear from the people who need that work so that we can turn around and say to our government, if we're looking at 1 in 5 workers, we're looking at these could be good jobs, these could be union jobs, and they will help everybody they hold up the rest of our economy. And so that is absolutely what we're pushing. And right now the response, to be politically is mixed.
Yeah.
So we're hearing, good things in terms of the listening and there's an understanding there. But like many countries, we're feeling this big push of a neoliberal response to things, which is not investing in our public systems, is not investing in ways that is going to bring the standards up to the level that people deserve. And, earlier we shared the story around, education workers in Ontario having to go on strike. And that is because they're some of the lowest paid people in our education system, and that system can't function without them. And why do those women have to take jobs that are not well paid in order to hold up the rest of the system? And so that's what we're going to keep pushing.
And one of the interesting, very good, yes, woo! One of the interesting things is, and you talk about a feminist government there, and I do want to ask the other panelists how they would define a feminist government in just a moment, but part of it is a lot of budgets are built in there's the expense and don't look at the benefit. In Australia, we've got a disability system where there's been an argument the government's putting too much money in, and then you do the economic analysis, and for every dollar you get a $2.25 return, because you're creating jobs, but you're also allowing women to get into paid employment, which has its own economic benefit. And then, of course, you've also got this discussion emerging around well-being budgets and how you actually measure not just economic in a narrow sense, but a broader sense on how an economy's going. So I don't know if any of you have any comments on that and just the way that we measure things to deliver a particular outcome, which isn't always in the interest of women and the work they do. Throw that out there. Do you want to have a go, Jyoti?
I think what we have understood, beside if we keep the pandemic part aside, because that's the focus one. But I think for us, because I come from a tobacco worker family, and I know that the workers had to take the children to the workplace because there is no one to take care of their children in the home. And if they don't take it, they might have to be at home and they lose income. Their productivity is less if there is no access to childcare. But we have seen that this, just having the childcare facility itself, this care is generating more livelihoods to the families, to the mothers who are actually now at peace going to work because they have childcare centers and the teachers to take care of the children. But also now the teachers are getting the livelihoods from the work they are doing. So it really, for us, it's really, this whole care economy is offering the livelihoods specifically to the informal economy workers where they are struggling for their income security and work security.
Amira, how would you define a feminist government?
Oh. Well, that's a really good question. How would I define a feminist government? Well, just, tying this into your previous question, a feminist government needs to understand that for women to work, for many women to work, they need supports like paid family medical leave, which we do not have in the United States. They need supports like childcare that is affordable or free, which we don't have in the United States. To take it further, a feminist government needs to support, women's reproductive health rights. And as you all know, we have a massive, massive battle in the United States right now on this, and we have lost the right to reproductive health care in many states and counting as we move forward. That deeply impacts women workers. It deeply impacts our families, our children. So I think all of these need to be tenets of a feminist government. I also think that a feminist government has to be a pro-labor government. There is a direct link between ensuring that women have the right to collectively bargain at the workplace to fight for fair and equitable wages and pensions and health care and everything else. And so we've been very lucky, as you all heard this morning, with President Joe Biden to have a really pro-labor president in the White House who has actually been very supportive of the labor movement's calls for investments in the caring economy. Unfortunately, all of those proposals that he supported have been stymied for us by our Congress, primarily by Republicans and some Democrats who are similar to Republicans. And we haven't been able to actually pass into law a number of these feminist policies like paid family medical leave, like childcare, like healthcare expansions that we need, and like labor law reform. And I think that's really important for us as female trade unionists, working with care workers who are primarily women, majority women, certainly in nursing, where nursing is a 90% female profession in the United States, to recognize that collective bargaining rights and strong labor law reform is a deeply feminist policy.
Agreed.
Zingwisa, I was doing my research before, and you are a real power broker in South Africa, I know that, inside the ANC. How is gender play out in the politics in South Africa? And how are these debates we're talking about being played out in your country?
Look, in our country, firstly, let me start by saying that we have a cabinet that has 50% constituted of women. And part of the issues that have been raised by my colleagues, South African government has moved to advance those. For an example, the issue of maternity leave, paternity leave, adoption leave, it is part of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act now. Those women that are unable to bear kids on their own, you can go for adoption and be able to adopt a child that is less than 2 years and be able to stay at home for a duration of 6 months. You have women now, initially it used to be 3 months, now you are able to go to a 6 months full paid maternity leave. Even fathers have the equal access of being fathers and staying at home to take care of their own children, to assist women. And also, our government has also extended what we call social grants. In schools, you have kids that will be taken to schools, particularly in the primary schooling system, where you have kids that would get the feeding scheme. So it takes the burden a little bit, make it easier for the parents who would not know what will the next food be coming from. So you have government that is providing using the NGOs to provide that feeding scheme at schools, but also in hospitals. You have patients that are in chronic medication in the primary healthcare system that when they visit the hospital to take their medication, they are also given nutritional food to ensure that they are able to take their medicines. But I must also say that where things are lacking a bit, particularly is in the private sector, where we're fighting for issues of childcare facilities, so that when you are going to school, when you are going to work and you have a newborn baby, 6 months, that child is still young, for you to continue to breastfeed and bond, we're still fighting as trade unions to ensure that the private sector would put those facilities there for women to be able to bring their kids, and you have a childcare facility and be able to go to breastfeed during your lunch break at work. That would also help in your productivity. Because if you have a mother who is worrying about the child at home, then you have a worker that is not productive at work. But also what we have pushed for, working with government and the private sector, is to ensure that we have peer education that we have in the private sector and in the public sector, where those that are at home were able to visit them, which would be done by workers in their workplaces to ensure that the care that they need, be it for them as patients or be it for their loved ones. Because when you have a worker that is at work, be it in the private or in the healthcare, in the public sector, that is still taking care of a sick one at home, the burden is upon that worker and therefore translate into non-productivity at work. And then we have those programs where you would have peer educators that will be able to go and take care of, give support to the workers in terms of their loved ones that are at home. But I must say that our government is doing the best that they can in ensuring that we are advancing. Remember the history of South Africa, where we are coming from. We still have the inequalities that are embedded in our country. And majority of the population is still struggling. But we think that with government that has provided houses, free low-cost houses for free water and sanitation, we still have a long way to go. But working with government, as you say, that COSATU is in alliance with the African National Congress that is in government, I think at the level of the policy development, we are making progress, in as much as we strongly believe that a lot still needs to be done.
Let's move it to organising care workers. You know, the 20th century version of a unionist would have been an angry bloke with his fist held high, probably on a building site or in a factory. Do those same narratives and, you know, union models work for the women who we need to bring into the movement in the caring economy? You go first, Siobhan.
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges is it's like, because it's a patchwork system in Canada, and so workplaces for the most part aren't huge, right? You're not going and it's one factory and it's like thousands of people. What we're looking at is like, so we have one story, which is the public side, which has a high percentage of unionization, and it is a lot of women. It's why our labor movement in Canada for a very long time has quite honestly had kind of gender equality in the membership. Or equal numbers anyways. And so, but the unionization becomes a challenge because one is then, you know, in Canada we have this federal versus provincial, and so when we're looking at this outsourcing, the not-for-profits, these are different employers, and we have to organize employer by employer in the majority of Canada, and so we can't organize a sector. And so it becomes a challenge in the sense that you're going and it's, you know, a small workplace. Or if we look at home care, there's not really a workplace where you can put up something on a bulletin board and, you know, and just say it. But I do think what does still work is the idea of solidarity, the idea of understanding that what we're doing is evening the playing field and giving our, you know, workers a voice and I don't think it matters what workers I've ever talked to. Everybody understands that side of it, so we can be a part of it. But how we organize has to really change in Canada. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to unionize in the care economy at the levels that we need to meet many of the goals that you talked about, which is, that is going to get us to this a place where there's gender equity in our society. And so we have a lot of work to do, but this idea of outsourcing and contracting makes it extremely challenging for us in Canada.
I think, and Judith had helped me here, I think Australia is a female, the average union member in Australia is now female, aren't they? Is that the same in your countries? Maybe Amira then.
Sorry, overall union membership?
Yeah.
I think if I'm correct, in 2021, I think we're just under half are women union
the
members.
trend lines
But the trend line is
yeah.
going up. Yeah, I would just say, to add to what Siobhan was saying, I think in organizing care workers, something certainly we see is that, and I can speak more directly to healthcare, obviously, than other types of care work, but certainly with nurses, when nurses organize, they are doing so in their interests as workers within a for-profit healthcare system that is devaluing their work, devaluing their professional judgment, but most importantly, devaluing patient care. And so they are organizing often with the main focus being that they are advocates for their patients. They have a duty to advocate for their patients. And I think we see this in lots of other types of care work. I think we see this with teachers. We see this with other types of healthcare workers. We see this with childcare workers who prioritize their patients, their students, their communities. That is what drives them. That's what drives the organizing. And so I think focusing on that, focusing on patient care, patient safety, student development, student care, student safety, health and safety, that is what powers the deep militancy we see within our expanding care work trade union community in the United States. That's what lends itself to the militancy we see is the responsibility care workers feel for their patients, their students, their communities.
Georgie, how do you organise your membership?
I think, it's a challenge in terms of organizing the workers in the informal economy because if we list out the trades under the informal economy, which constitute 93% of the labor workforce, is 122 trades. Some are construction workers, agriculture workers, salt farmers, waste recyclers, so many home-based workers, the Indian cigar rollers, so many trades. So I think for us, it's very, the approach we have that we do it's difficult to organize at the workplaces because some of them only work for a daily wage or for a piece rate like sewing 10 petticoats and get money on that. So you cannot disturb their work in terms of doing the organizing there. But we do more on the community level when they are back from the work. We do the organizing education there. And I think most at SEVA, we have this whole approach that we have membership on the ground which have been organized. We have 2.1 million membership in India. And then we, in the community, because we organize the members trade-wise. So all 122, we have the data on which trade has how many membership. And those trades have leaders who represent those members because everyone goes to the work, but there has to be someone who leads them. So we train those leaders very well, and then through leaders, actually more of our organizing is increasing. During the pandemic, I know that in 2021, we were only 1.9 million, and now after pandemic, it was, while we did so much of work, but during the pandemic, our membership increases to 2.1 million.
Goodness.
So I think the cadre of leaders who are from the communities, from the trades, are trained in a way to go and organize the other workers is the approach working very well for us because it's difficult to go and organize at the workplaces.
Singri, so you're one of a number of national union leaders who are female. Yesterday we had at the table Liz from the AFL-CIO and Sally from the ACTU. Do people like you taking that leadership role change the way that people working see unions?
Sorry, can you
Well, just the fact that you're a female leading COSATU, that flows right down on the way people see the unions, the people you're trying to organise?
Well, I must admit that it has, and in a good way. I think trade unions are changing, difficult as it is because the environment is a patriarchal one. If you go to the private sector in particular, predominantly male, but we have seen the trends that are beginning to change now. In trade unions, we see women moving into the leadership positions at the national level, at the provincial level. We have now young workers that are organized. We have, for an example, we have doctors' union in South Africa. We have police unions in South Africa. We have emergency workers' union in South Africa. You have, of course, teachers' union. But it has changed the way I think trade unions have been perceived as a patriarchal environment to that where women begin to have a voice. And not just a voice, but a voice that is able to change the things and change the things around. But in our orientation in the trade union movement in South Africa, of course, we believe that we don't see men as enemies in the workplace because we're all entangled by the same system of capitalism. But we also appreciate and understand that we are not equal. Women are more burdened than men, and women have been less privileged than men. And hence, even in terms of our programs, we highlight and ensure that gender is mainstreamed in all our programs. And I want to agree, just to touch on the last question that you raised, on the difficulties of organizing workers, particularly in the K economy. Domestic workers, as an example, we work with the SATSAO, which is a trade union for domestic workers in South Africa. A very big union, but difficult to organize because the spaces are enclosed spaces that some of us seated here are employers to those domestic workers. But what we do as COSATU is to work with them and ensure that they are able to have a voice at the level of policy development to ensure that the issues that pertain to their sector are being taken care of and they find a space in the legislation. We are also difficult as it is to organize farm workers because also they are in the private sector. You know, employers continue to exploit farm workers and the national minimum wage, we have managed to move them up to a national minimum wage, but we still have private employers who refuse to pay that. And what they do, they take the advantage of the migrant labor and use them, particularly those that are not documented, push them in and use them because they understand that if they were to raise these issues, they would then face the might of the law by them possible deportation that will then take place. But of course, we have systems in place that government has put in where we have a CCMA, which is the Conciliation and Mediation institution, where we would ensure that workers that we represent, even if they are not unionized, we make sure that we will go and defend them. And in any case, if there's a worker that has a case of not being paid what is due to them in terms of the national minimum wage, and that worker faces deportation, that worker would not be deported when the case is still pending. That worker will have to be ensured that the case is closed and the worker is given what is due to him or her before any deportation can take place. Because the Constitution of South Africa says South Africa belongs to all who live in it. So even migrant labor, even if you are legally or illegally documented or undocumented, you still have the right that are enshrined in the Constitution of the country that each and every worker has, even if you are a South African or non-South African. So with the progress I think we've made, even in trade unions, we've seen leadership moving. But of course, there are those sectors that, for example, the mine workers, where you would see in the national leadership, in the provincial leadership, less of women, in as much as they are there as members. But I think the sector itself is a sector that is more masculine, is a sector that is more still patriarchal, but we have a women's committee in the mining industry, in the union itself, that is trying to make the inroads with all the difficulties.
I'm interested from all of you just for some examples of campaigns you've run in caring areas and anything that's particularly worked or where you've learnt something when it hasn't quite worked. Again, Siobhan, I'll start with you and then we'll just go down the line.
Sure. I think all of this becomes connected in terms of the relevancy of unions to women and the care economy and what we need to do. And so my mind first goes to the postal workers in Canada who decades ago won our maternity leave. And they won it first in their collective agreements and then for everybody. And that often is a success for us, is if we can get it in enough collective agreements, and then when we push, because we always push for all workers. More recently in Canada, we had funding for a national childcare system, and so the funding comes from our federal level, and that came from talking to people, talking to everybody, and so everybody was pushing for that, so that we had this recognition by the government to go, you're right, this isn't just about one small sector of society, it's about everybody. Now, to be completely honest, we've gotten some federal funding and now, the devil's in the details, if you will, because we're not seeing it, in every part of Canada roll out in the way we want to see. But that has to do with having active women in the labor movement. It has to do with women in leadership. It has to do with us being relevant as unions because we're covering everybody's issues and maybe not going back to what some stereotypical view of what unions are. And so we're taking that energy and now looking at our care economy in Canada to put that on the agenda so that we can see improvements there, all with that lens is that people deserve the care that they require, but we also need to value that work, and it is not valued, and that will get us to a more, gender inclusive and an equal society. And so you're right, there's lots of ways we can see where it's been successful, and we're hoping that we will see more success now when it looks at the care economy.
Amira, you work with the National Nurses United in the States. What are some of the good news stories?
So I think the most recent really good news story was the fight that NNU and a ton of healthcare worker, social service worker unions in the United States, with the leadership of the AFL-CIO, ran over the course of the pandemic to win health and safety protections for healthcare workers. And it was the one victory we had in that first year and a half of the pandemic. And I also think it's important to highlight this because when we're talking about care workers, health and safety issues are really, really at the forefront of what they are concerned about in the United States right now. Because as we've all talked about, they are so devalued by employers, and when it comes to care work in the United States, it's mostly private, for-profit corporations that don't want to spend the money on PPE, that don't want to spend the money on safe staffing levels, that are doing everything they can to de-skill the workforce in order to spend as little money as they have to staff facilities, staff programs. And so the fight for the OSHA standard, I think, was just incredible because all of our unions got together immediately the moment the pandemic hit, the first week of March. We got together and we filed petitions to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration for what's called in the US an emergency temporary standard. There had not been an emergency temporary standard since the 1980s on anything, which just to say is wild and tells you just how anti-labor so many of our governments have been for so many decades. But it took 16 months of telling our stories, of testifying over and over again, of protests at the White House and the Department of Labor, at hospitals, at other healthcare facilities across the country. Took 16 months. It took the election of President Biden, and then it took a hell of a lot of work to break it loose from the Biden administration in June 2021. And for 6 glorious months, we had federal protections that employers had to abide by for healthcare workers. We should have had it for all frontline workers. We only want it for healthcare workers. We are now in the process of trying to shake loose the final standard, which will mean that healthcare employers, for the life of COVID existing, from now until eternity, unfortunately, will have to protect us. But that is the sort of work I think we need to continue to do to win health and safety protections in a whole bunch of areas. We need an infectious diseases standard, not just for COVID, for all infectious diseases that follow the precautionary principle to ensure that our care workers are protected. We need a standard to stop workplace violence, because care workers, all sorts of care workers in the US, healthcare workers and social service workers have the highest rates of violence on the job of any industry. People are shocked by this, but the highest rates, to the point that it is a driver of care workers leaving their jobs. We need a standard to prevent these workplace violence incidents and injuries and unfortunately deaths. And so that was, I think, a really great example. That was the one piece of good news that we had.
Fantastic. Hey, Jyoti, apart from your increase in membership over the last couple of years, what's on your highlights reel from the last couple of years?
I think I'm focusing our union, the strategy of our going forward. I think we very much believe in a joint strategy of struggle and development. That is, we organize the union on one part, but we also form cooperatives of these women workers to deal with the issues practically on the ground. So one hand you struggle as a union, but on the other hand you also carry out the developmental work through cooperatives and collectives and associations and other organizations, which are all owned by the members, the workers themselves. So they are all membership based. So SEWA is a union, but we have more than 120 other organizations which are fallen from, we express SEWA to be a banyan tree, where now the branches have been fallen out in forms of cooperatives. We have marketing organizations, the women-owned companies, as per their needs and demand. So one hand you do advocate and struggle with government, raise your voices for the policies, but also on the other hand you carry out the developmental work together. Like for the child care, we do ask government that we need more investment in that, because you have to take care of the children, but also we have cooperative of the child care which is running the cooperative at the local level. So we do need investment in terms of social protection overall, but also local care economy. So it is two-way, that's a joint strategy what we are doing, and that is really helping in terms of moving forward for organizing more workers.
Fantastic. Zingwisa, what was your highlight of 2022?
It was when in one of the campaigns that we advanced, which has seen success, is the inclusion of domestic workers in the injury on duty occupational health and safety. Domestic workers previously were not covered. If you get injured at work, it is in the private space, you are unable to claim, but with the advances that we've made as a union, through NEDLEC and in Parliament, we've managed to push to ensure that domestic workers are included and they're able to make claims when they're injured on duty. And also we had the Occupational Health and Safety Act, which was separate from the Health and Safety Act of mine workers. We said that cannot be separated. It has to be included in the legislation, and we've seen both acts being made as one. Another one is the Social Relief Distress Grant. During COVID, we have seen how the unemployed have been impacted by COVID. And as trade unions, as COSATU, we advanced and said we need a social relief particularly for the unemployed. and government extended the 350 in terms of rents to the unemployed in South Africa, and it continued, and we fought for it not to be stopped, and we said this must be the basis of the basic income grant in South Africa, that people that have lost hope in finding employment, they still need to leave. And for us to ensure that they continue to survive, government must introduce the basic income grant, which for now we have as a social relief distress grant that COSATU has put, and it was accepted and government has implemented. Another issue that has been a highlight for us is the national minimum wage. The national minimum wage, as much as others scorned on us on this issue, but it has managed to lift the salaries of 6 million workers who were paid below the national minimum wage. And the national minimum wage, we have a commission that looks into it on a yearly basis so that it is in line with the inflation. And COSATU is part of that commission. We are the ones that are advocating to ensure that it is in line with the inflation. But ours were saying the next campaign that we are already advancing and want to see to its fruition is it being a living wage. And also what we have campaigned for is the issue of the integration of community care workers into the system, that they must now be absorbed by government as care workers that are in the formal economy. It is a campaign that we are advancing. It is a campaign that we will not tire until we see it to its fruitions.
Guys, we're almost up to the hour. It's just been a fascinating discussion that's gone in so many different areas. And at the start of it, I thought when we said the caring economy, we were talking about a section of the economy as if we carve out caring. But the discussion has been so interconnected that I think it's actually about making the economy more caring, which is slightly different because it's not just about looking at individual jobs. It is looking about the whole way we approach work, but also the way we respect women and women's experience, not just in work, but in society. I don't know if any of you have got a final comment. We've got a couple more minutes of anything you'd like the audience to take away with, but thank you very much for such an interesting and stimulating discussion. So maybe final words from each, and then we'll give you all a big round of applause. Go down the line.
I just wanted to add one thing, or maybe that could be the final part, but I think while I was talking on the childcare and training the workers themselves to become the teachers and they run the local childcare centers for the members of the union, we thought that if we build the capacity, more investment in terms of building the capacity of the teachers would really help. And if the certification comes for them, a formal certification that they are the teachers, then for us that is formalizing the informal economy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Siobhan?
I'd say that like all of us will require care at one point or another in our lives, arguably at all parts of our lives. And so it just shows how important these jobs are. And so that means us as trade unionists and as feminist trade unionists need to be ensuring that we are investing in care work because it is a big part of our economy. And when they're good jobs, we will get a better world out of it. And so it's great to be here because I think all of the victories that people are talking about up here will help all of us in our work in our own countries. So thank you for this opportunity.
Siobhan. Amira?
Yeah, so what you just said about making the world more caring, that really made me think about the deep connection between the caring economy and the labor movement's long-term climate justice program. And here at this ITUC, we're talking so much about a just transition and transitioning to a green economy. And so I just want to point out and make sure we have a moment to recognize that caring jobs are green jobs, and that there is a deep link between our work as a movement internationally on a just transition to protect our environment with creating a more caring world. Because with climate change, with environmental degradation and pollution, we are impacting the health and safety of our communities, and we're gonna need care workers even more. So I think there's a really deep link that for those of us that represent care workers and for women workers, it's so important for us to be a part of those conversations and to be in leadership of thinking through this transition to a just, caring economy together.
Fantastic. And last word for Zingwisa.
Thank you very much. I think if you talk about the world being more caring, what we have, I think, mastered in South Africa as COSATU, working with government and civil society, is the interconnectedness of civil society, working with trade unions and government on the issues of care economy. We work with churches, we work with traditional leaders and traditional healers, and we work with NGOs. The purpose of doing that is to ensure that each part of civil society takes responsibility of the care economy, because members of society are members of church. Members of society are living with traditional leaders that are leaders in their communities. We have traditional healers in South Africa that you cannot separate from the care system, from the care economy, because when people are sick, we are spiritual beings, and therefore you need to have that connectedness of the spiritual healing and that of the general one that in the healthcare system. And if you are unable to make that connectedness, because when a person comes to you as a traditional healer, you must be able to make reference to say, but this needs to be taken care of, because I think apart from your spiritual challenges, you still have issues that are pertaining to TB or for an example. And that relationship that we have of ensuring that we have a world that, or a country that looks into the care economy broader than just care workers, as you say, exclusively. We have managed to integrate it, because also civil society, what they do, they are able to make references when they are members of community, they are members of the church, are not well. We have the database from the church that will be able to say, we have so many people that need social grants, we have so many people that need a primary healthcare system, and therefore we are able to be that point of reference for the healthcare system in order for people to be able to access healthcare in South Africa.
Caring for the economy, caring for the spirit, caring for the future. What a great way to finish off this discussion. Can we just thank Siobhan, Amira, Zingwisa and Jody. What a great discussion. Thank you very much.
Well done.